When is a transport ride not a transport ride? When it's in Rollercoaster Tycoon, of course. While transport rides have functions unique to this ride type, guests don't see them any differently to any other type of ride, meaning they don't use them as transport. Want to ride a coaster the other side of the park? Rollercoaster Tycoon guests will walk rather than take any form of available transport. There is an exception to this, which I'll get onto later. First, a quick overview, as I'll cover all transport ride types in this video. Transport rides exist at many real-life parks and are intended to help guests move quickly and easily around the park. In Rollercoaster Tycoon, they are among the cheapest tracked rides to build per tile piece, although given the likely length of the ride, it can soon add up. And while guests don't actually use transport rides as transport, you can still have these ride types work that way for you. For example, if the front of your park is very busy, transport rides will take guests to other areas of the park. You could also use them in busy areas to take guests elsewhere. They also help your guests move without tiring them out, especially helpful in large parks. But remember, when a guest boards, they will always get off at the next exit stop. So if you are using transport for crowd management, bear this in mind. And that brings me to the exception to the transport which isn't transport rule. If a transport ride is free, guests will ride it no matter what their happiness, and even if they want to leave the park. So, while they won't be deliberately using the ride as transport to exit, you can encourage your guests who want to leave to do so a little bit quicker by giving them a transport ride option to get to the exit of your park. The same applies if you have two sections of park not connected by path, or connected but with a long walk. Add a free-to-ride transport ride to save your guests' legs, helping them arrive in the other area of your park happy and not so tired. Transport rides can also be built as short loops to create a cheap gentle ride, similar to how car rides work. But you'll need a lot of scenery to get any level of reasonable excitement, and make sure you have tracks long enough to avoid stat penalties, and I'll come to those requirements shortly. First, let's take a look at different types of transport. As we do so, I'll mention those stat requirements and then show a comparison between different transports at the end. Like all tracked rides, there are some stat requirements to avoid halving your stats on transport rides. Across all transport, the majority of the ride must not be underground, and then each type has its own length requirement. This should be reached automatically if you are using the rides for transport, but they are worth considering if you are using them as simple one-station rides, such as steam train around a lake. First, the monorail, which in many cases would be the most effective choice for a transport ride. That needs a minimum length of 170 metres, that's 558 feet, which I've shown here to outline how short this would be. You get a choice of three train types. The retro style and small monorail cars can reach up to 14 miles per hour, which is 22 kilometres per hour, and they can carry 24 guests on each train. But the best option is the streamlined train, which hits higher speeds of 22 miles an hour or 35 kilometers per hour and can carry up to 70 guests per train. There is also a suspended monorail option, which is the most expensive transport ride to build and is larger than the traditional monorail. You'll need a 3-unit clearance rather than the standard 2 for pathways and other rides. Another option seen at many real-life parks is the miniature railway. These operate at top speeds of 9 miles an hour or 14 kilometers per hour and can take up to 36 guests per train, which is reduced if you use the American-style trains. If you opt for the covered cars, guests will be happy to ride them in the rain, which is also true of all monorail car types. Using the same track as the miniature railway is the trams, which also appear reskinned as London Bus, San Francisco Trams and School Bus Ride in Wacky Worlds and Time Twister expansion packs. In addition to continuous circuit mode, trams allow shuttle mode in Rollercoaster Tycoon Classic. They can also reach slightly higher speeds, and despite lower car capacities, you can get more guests on the ride. That's because the trams don't have an empty front train, so you can get more passenger cars with the trams, meaning you get more passengers for the same length station as a miniature railway. Another great transport option is the chairlift, and this is quite different from the monorail, railway and trams. First off, it has the highest support capability in the game, allowing you to build these over your existing rides. They are relatively cheap and compact owing to its unique two-way track, and the roof on the cars allow them to class as indoor rides, meaning guests will ride them in the rain, unless you switch to ski lift chairs, in which case you lose the roof and guests will be put off in the rain. A downside compared to the track-based transport rides is chairlifts are low on throughput due to the two-person seats. However, unlike the other transport rides, track is two-way, meaning you don't need to reconnect the loop as you do with monorails and railways. You can set the speed at either 2, 4, 6 or 9 miles per hour, and that's a consistent speed. The ride doesn't slow down uphill or increase downhill, making it a great choice for getting from low land to the top of large hills and cliffs. But in exchange for increased speed and throughput, you do lose on excitement rating. Finally, the lift. I really don't understand this ride as a Rollercoaster Tycoon concept, and suspect it was only included in order to allow Oil Derrick and Sky Tower to be recreated in the Six Flags collaboration. In those real-life parks, guests can benefit of views across the park and its surrounding areas. In Rollercoaster Tycoon, however, guests don't care for the view. It transports guests vertically, so could be useful from the bottom to the top of a mountain, but you lose stats if more than 5/8 of the ride is underground, and if you have a mountain and build the lift above ground, then you may end up with rather long paths to connect the top of the lift to the top of the mountain. Some scenarios have lifts as standalone operations, but even if there is no ride charge, some guests don't get back on to return to ground level, leaving them stranded at the top. I don't think I've ever actually built a lift in a scenario, but it's worth noting they do reappear in the expansion packs as Mine Lift in Wacky Worlds and Teleporter in Time Twister. So let's compare these transport types, ignoring the lift as it isn't really comparable to the others. First on cost, where the miniature railway comes in the cheapest per piece, but given that the chairlift offers two-way track, they are technically cheapest, as you can get track in both directions for the £32 price. They are also very cheap to build up high, with little added to the cost each time. You'll need to raise 2 units to add on £1, euro or dollar, whichever currency you play the game in. In terms of stat requirements, these rides are all fairly similar. They require a minimum track length which should be easily reached if you're using it across a large area of your park, and they require more than half of the ride to be outside, by which I mean not underground and also not covered by scenery that is 1 tile or larger, i.e. inside a building. Lifts don't have a minimum length, but you do need a little more of this ride to be above ground, and chairlifts will need at least 2 stations. If you want to take a less realistic but arguably more effective approach to moving guests around your park, try a high-speed coaster, which doesn't require lifts to generate speed. So a limb launch coaster or anything with booster tracks. It will get high stats, attracting more guests and allowing you to charge more, and can still be built as though it was a transport ride by using similar track layout and multiple stations, like this looping coaster. The downside of this is the cost. A looping coaster costs £24 more per single track piece than a monorail, and £28 more than a steam train. And the second downside is the capacity. Streamlined monorail trains can carry far more passengers than coasters, and you can also have more trains than the same layout as a coaster would give you. If you do take the coaster option, maximise your number of trains by using block section mode with block breaks behind each station. Unlike coasters, where the number of trains is determined by your station length, transport rides have the number of available cars determined by total track length, so the longer the ride, the more trains you receive. But the length of trains is dictated by your station length, so make sure every station is long enough for the number of cars you want on each train. Monorails and trams can operate in shuttle mode, which means they don't need to be a complete loop. This restricts your ride to just 1 train, however, but can be useful for creating transport rides with just 2 trains and a short distance between them. But in reality, I'm not sure when or why this would be of use. I created this shuttle tram ride as part of a seaside theme park, but it was a pay-to-enter park, so throughput wasn't essential to me, and if it was, I may have created a loop instead to gain more cars. One final note on transport rides: there are no awards for these. Unlike food, roller coasters, toilets, gentle and water rides, you cannot obtain a Best Transport Ride award. And that's transport rides. Do you use them often? And if so, what are your go-to options? Let me know in the comments.